This week on Jerusalem Dateline, a series of mysterious explosions rock Iran's nuclear and missile facilities. Is Israel behind it? And Turkey's President Erdogan wants to turn a world-renowned church into a mosque. Plus, Black Lives Matter advances anti-Semitism in protest. And a look back at a gift to the Jewish people from Christian Zionists. All this and more this week on Jerusalem Dateline. Hello and welcome to this edition of Jerusalem Dateline. I'm Chris Mitchell. Within the past few weeks, a series of massive and mysterious explosions have rocked Iran's nuclear and missile facilities. Many in the Middle East are wondering who's behind these incidents and what they mean for Iran's nuclear program. The biggest explosion took place Thursday, July 2nd at Natanz, one of Iran's main nuclear centers. It damaged a new centrifuge assembly center designed to enrich uranium. An Iranian official explained Iran's version of what happened.
Today, at around 2 a.m., there was an incident as a result of which there were physical damages. Thank God we haven't had fatalities.
The New York Times reported that a Middle East intelligence official said Israel was responsible and also cited a member of Iran's Revolutionary Guard Corps who said an explosive was used. This satellite image at Natanz showed extensive damage, but the Natanz explosion wasn't the only recent incident. An explosion hit Iran's strategic missile complex at Kojir on June 25th, and another blast at a medical center in Tehran killed at least 19. With so many explosions in the space of just several days, many in the region are asking who's behind these blasts. A Kuwaiti newspaper, Al Jarida, claimed Israel used F-35s to attack Iran's missile production complex. Then a group calling themselves the Cheaters of the Homeland claimed responsibility for the explosion at Natanz. Some security experts also believe an Israeli cyber attack led to the Kojir blast. Here in Israel, when asked about the explosions, Foreign Minister Gabi Ashkenazi said, "Our actions in Iran are better left unsaid." While alternate Prime Minister Benny Gantz said, "Not every event in Iran is necessarily related to us." How Iran responds to these incidents remains to be seen. Regardless of whether or not Israel is behind these incidents, Middle East expert Seth Frantzman says Israel's goal is clear.
Obviously, Israel does not want there to be any conditions under Iran would acquire a nuclear device or a system to deliver it, because if you build the nuclear bomb, you also need a rocket to deliver it somewhere. So both of those would be, I assume, technology that Iran must not possess. And Israel and the United States, I think, have been very clear on not having that happen.
On Monday, Israel launched a new spy satellite, and Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu extended the term of Israel's spy chief until next year. Analysts see both as signs of the ongoing simmering war between the Islamic Republic of Iran and the Jewish state of Israel. In its more than 1,400-year existence, the Hagia Sophia in Istanbul, Turkey, has served as the Byzantine Empire's main cathedral, a mosque under the Ottoman Empire, and today a museum. But now Turkish President Erdogan wants to turn it back into a mosque, and worldwide opposition to that plan is growing. Dale Hurd has the story.
It's long been the hope of many Turkish Muslims that the Hagia Sophia Museum would one day be converted back into a mosque. And Turkey's highest administrative court, the Council of State, is considering whether to allow it. The Hagia Sophia was a church for more than 900 years, then a mosque for almost 500 years. And it remains a major symbol of the struggle between Islam and Christianity. It was changed from a mosque to a museum by the founder of modern Turkey, Mustafa Kemal Atatürk.
Ataturk established Hagia Sophia as a museum to underline his vision of secularizing Turkey. And nearly 100 years later, I think Erdogan is trying to do the opposite.
The coronavirus outbreak has made Turkey's already weak economy even worse, with trade and tourism dropping dramatically. And some suspect President Erdogan is using the Hagia Sophia issue to shore up his political base and distract attention from the poor economy.
So it's not about a prayer space. It's not about building a mosque or providing for a mosque where that does not exist. It's rather using an issue of what I call Muslim nationalism, or emphasizing Turkey's Islamic identity at the expense of others to mobilize his right-wing and conservative base.
Pro-Erdogan leader Yunus Genç said, of course someone who is a Christian would be against the Hagia Sophia reopening as a mosque. This is natural. But we're Muslim, and we want this monument to serve as a mosque in Istanbul where Muslims are a majority. Bartholomew, the Patriarch of Constantinople, warns turning the museum into a mosque could bring confrontation and conflict. The European Parliament has also gone on record opposing the reconversion. Even some Russian parliament members are upset, and the United States Commission on International Religious Freedom has demanded the plans be withdrawn. First built in 360, destroyed by riots and then rebuilt under Emperor Justinian, the Hagia Sophia has undergone several name changes and even had its dome replaced after an earthquake. A decision on the proposal to change it yet again is expected within days. Dale Hurd, CBN News.
Up next, a major U.S. Jewish leader reacts to the rise of anti-Semitism in the wake of the Black Lives Matter movement. From New York City to Washington and the Nation of Islam leader, Louis Farrakhan, there's been a dramatic rise in both anti-Israel and anti-Semitic rhetoric in the wake of the Black Lives Matter movement's protests. Here's a few recent examples.
Al-Mawtli Israel! Al-Mawtli America!
Occupy, slaughter, and continue to force millions of Palestinians onto their killing fields called refugee and concentration camps are the relatives of the Europeans.
You gotta abolish the Zionistic state of Israel. And you gotta abolish the United States government.
Israel, we know you murder children too!
I talked with one of America's top Jewish leaders, Rabbi Abraham Cooper from the Simon Wiesenthal Center, about the alarming rise in anti-Semitism and how the center hopes to reach out to African American leaders to combat both racism and anti-Semitism. Rabbi Cooper, you wrote an article called Finding Leaders We Can Work With in the BLM Era. What do you mean by that?
Well, obviously the world changed with the murder of George Floyd. And I think there was an amazing moment that was right there in the grasp of all America, in which everyone was united, understanding that that was a murder, that there are bad apples among the police, and that things have to change. Unfortunately, from that moment to where we are today, is we see a lot of forces unleashed. I think that everyone identifies with the concept of Black Lives Matter. African Americans are still battling racism. That is the truth. But as we see, some of the forces unleashed also have led to looting, violence, the attempt to tear down American history, and worst of all, the attempt that now has some grounding in reality to defund the police.
How would you describe some of the anti-Semitism and anti-Israel rhetoric and positions that you've been hearing in the last several weeks?
Fundamentally, the most troubling is the lie that Israel somehow was involved in training the bad apples of the police in the United States, of conflating anti-Israel sentiment led by Palestinians and their allies with the very real problems on the ground in the United States. It reminds me of a statement made, I think around 100 years ago, by Winston Churchill, who said that, a lie can travel halfway around the world before the truth gets its pants on. And that was 100 years before the internet. So we see social media carrying these screeds, these lies, not just anti-Semitic, but also that America is systemically racist and, all police are pigs, they deserve to die, etc. Some of the worst stuff that you see how powerfully social media can carry it. And just the latest July 4th speech by Farrakhan, which was going to be broadcast by a new Fox platform and was canceled due to our protest and the protest of others, nonetheless was broadcast on social media by a number of African Americans. 500,000 people Curtis agreed where Jews were called the devil and we're linked to coronavirus, and off we go to the races. So this social media, and of course we're using similar platforms right now, is an incredibly powerful tool, but it also means that you don't have to wait for the lie to get halfway around the world. It's already going to be instantaneously injected into the mainstream of our culture and our society. And let's remember, Chris, that the last time we spoke, at the beginning of the coronavirus, an extremely significant spike in anti-Semitic hate crimes in the United States, including the beating of Jews on the streets of New York. So that hatred hasn't gone away. One other point that I find particularly enraging is this notion of so-called Jewish white privilege. To me, it's especially outrageous because apparently for 6 million Jews during the Holocaust, they weren't white enough to avoid being mass murdered by the Nazis, who were the ultimate supremacists. So the throwing around of these ideas, kind of like throwing mud against the wall, see what sticks. And then seeing how social media and a very politicized journalism situation means that some of the most vile, disgusting, and baseless ideas are elevated to discussion and well, how many likes did they get, et cetera, et cetera.
What are you planning to do personally and the Simon Wiesenthal Center to combat this rise of anti-Semitism and anti-Israel rhetoric?
What's really important for our center, for the American Jewish community and beyond, is we can't defeat anti-Semitism without friends and allies. And that means that we have to not play it by the game book of a Farrakhan or others that want to separate us. We have to have our eyes, ears, and hearts open to African Americans and other communities, find common cause where we can, and I believe there's a lot of common ground that we can in fighting anti-Semitism and racism going forward. I think what Farrakhan and the others want to do is they want to isolate and they want to bully the Jewish community. We're not going to let them do that.
Well, Rabbi Cooper of the Simon Wiesenthal Center, thanks so much for joining us at this critical time. Coming up, an Israeli author explains why the Jewish state needs to stay one step ahead of its enemies. Earlier, we brought you a story about the possibility that Israel is behind the mysterious explosions destroying parts of Iran's nuclear facilities. Israeli leaders won't say if they're responsible. But since its very beginning, Israel has faced extermination from its enemies, and it's fought back a number of ways, including through the controversial use of assassinations. Here's a story we did a few years ago with an Israeli author who explains why this deadly technique and others play such a part in Israel's history. In 1983, 241 Americans died in the Marine barracks bombing in Beirut, Lebanon. Israel's assassination of Imad Muniyah, the mastermind behind that bombing, is one reason why many consider Israel's intelligence services the best in the world. A new book tells why. The book is called Rise and Kill First: The Secret History of Israel's Targeted Assassinations. Award-winning journalist Ronit Bergman told CBN News the title comes from an ancient Jewish writing he heard quoted by members of Israel's intelligence services.
They used the phrase from the Babylonian Talmud, which says, if someone comes to kill you, rise up and kill him first. The mindset which says, when every decade your prime nemesis, your chief adversary, your main enemy, declares publicly that its main goal is to destroy Israel, then there's no other choice but rise up and kill him first.
Since its founding, that's been the public goal of Israel's enemies, from Saddam Hussein to Yasser Arafat to Iran's Mahmoud Ahmadinejad.
All of these, when they are your enemies, you would do whatever you can to defend your country and your people.
Bergman says after the Holocaust, Jews followed three lessons that permeate Israel's intelligence services.
First is that there will always be a Gentile who is after us to kill us. Second, all or most of the other Gentiles will not help. so we can rely only on ourselves. And third is that we need to have a safe haven, a refuge, a country of our own to defend it, and to defend it with all means possible.
In his book, Bergman explains the secret that makes Israel's intelligence the best in the world.
But there's one extra thought, and that thought is that they are the guards on the wall. They are, if borrowing a phrase from Star Trek, they are the final frontier, guarding the safety of the country and the security of the citizens of Israel and Jews worldwide, not just in Israel. They believe that if they don't work today with everything they have, then tomorrow Jews are going to be killed.
Bergman's book takes readers through how Mossad chief Meir Dagan urged Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu and then Defense Minister Ehud Barak to use assassinations and cyber warfare against Iran instead of bombing its nuclear facilities. He also describes the elimination of Hezbollah commander Imad Muniyah, the most wanted terrorist in the world, and how Yasser Arafat escaped dozens of assassination attempts. We asked about the dilemma of targeted killings.
There are two questions that are relevant. Is it effective, and is it legally and morally justified?
In describing an effective example, he pointed to the Second Intifada, when Palestinian suicide bombings killed and maimed thousands of Israelis. Bergman says Israel didn't go after the bombers, but their leaders.
But when Israel started to kill all the layer, the hierarchy above them, the bomb makers, the indoctrinators, the recruiters, the drivers, the regional command, the military command, the political leaders, then these people, those who were not yet killed, who had no problem with sending other people to their death, well, they had another thought. They did not want to check by themselves if the option of the 72 virgin is true or not.
After 9/11, the rules changed, and the U.S. began targeted killings with help from Israel's intelligence expertise. Now many Western nations also follow the Israeli model. Targeted killings remain an intense debate, and only Israel's prime minister can approve them. Yet with all its success, Bergman quotes one ex-Mossad chief who summed up their dilemma.
At the core of what we did every day in Mossad was that dilemma of what does a democracy under grave threats allow itself to take and do to defend its citizens, while it knows that it unfortunately might violate other values.
Bergman's book took 8 years to write and includes more than 1,000 interviews. On the eve of Israel's 70th anniversary, Bergman, the son of 2 Holocaust survivors, sees it as a contribution to the ongoing remarkable story.
Sometimes I walk in the streets of Israel and I say, this is really a miracle. I think what was achieved here during the last 110 years, since the early 20th century, can not be described as nothing but a miracle. And I'm so happy to be part of that.
Up next, see how an iconic Jerusalem landmark gets a makeover while bringing Jews and Christians closer together. The Christian bond with Israel goes way back before the Jewish state was even established. Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu credited Christian Zionists with a crucial role in founding the modern state of Israel. He made those remarks several years ago when he dedicated Jerusalem's iconic windmill after Christians gave it a makeover. The story is also part of our virtual tour of Israel. Take a look.
This windmill has been a Jerusalem landmark for more than 150 years, and now it's working again, thanks to a team effort. The Jerusalem Foundation, a group of Dutch Christians and government ministries, paid for the restoration work. That prompted praise for Christian Zionists from Prime Minister Netanyahu.
I don't believe that the Jewish state and modern Zionism would have been possible without Christian Zionism. I think that the many Christian supporters of the rebirth of the Jewish state and the ingathering of the Jewish people in the 19th century made possible the rise of Jewish Zionism.
A wealthy British Jew, Sir Moses Montefiore, established the windmill as part of the first Jewish settlements, or suburbs, outside the old city walls in the mid-1800s.
This is really the beginning of the new city, the modern city, the rebirth of Jerusalem.
Montefiore's great-great-nephew, Simon Montefiore, is a historian and author.
And so from this little windmill and these Montefiore cottages, just outside the Jaffa Gate, started all the suburbs around the old city walls, and that grew into the huge modern city of Jerusalem.
During Israel's independence war, Jewish fighters used the windmill to defend the city. In 1948, the British blew up the top of the windmill in what they called Operation Don Quixote. It was later restored for looks, but it never worked.
Almost every year I was here and I see the mill, and I feel the pain of the mill, and I think one day we have to give new life to the mill.
Windmill expert and Dutch Christian Gerrit Koenen initiated the restoration project and got others involved.
And I believe with the help of God, and I think it's the plan of God to repair, to restore the windmill, because it's more than a windmill, it's a symbol.
Dutch millwright Willem Dijkstra says he studied old photos and material for the restorations that took about 3 months.
It's not like rebuilding, you do a reconstruction, so you have to try to find the most closest way how it was in the early times.
A few months from now, shafts and machinery will be installed to grind flour as the mill did for its first 20 years.
For me, it's more than a mill. I like the mills very much because my family for 100 years were millers. Personally, I'm convinced that this mill is a sign of hope for the Jewish people here in Israel. It's connected to the resurrection of the state of Israel after 2,000 years.
Julie Stahl, CBN News, Jerusalem.
Well, that's just one of the stories you can see on our virtual tour throughout Israel. You know, we started this tour months ago to bring Israel to you because the coronavirus won't let you come to visit here. We've finished the tour now, but the whole series, more than 100 stories, covering Israel from Jerusalem to Shiloh to the Golan Heights and the Dead Sea, is on our Facebook page, on YouTube, and Instagram. And join us soon when we begin a new series on Israeli innovations. We'll show you stories on how Israel is becoming a light to the nations and changing the world. You can also join us for our Facebook Lives, where we continue to bring you the people and the land of Israel. Well, that's all for this edition. We'll see you next time.